A few years ago, I was invited by the computer company Hewlett-Packard to predict what pedagogy would be like in the future in what they called a Web3 world. We described that at the time as Pedagogy 3.0. It's been interesting over the last few days to revisit those ideas to see whether or not the predictions came true. The pandemic situation has advanced the use of ICT in education by about 10 years in a matter of a few weeks. So what did Pedagogy 3.0 say that the ICT world would be like? One of the first things teachers say when they experience online teaching is that the technology changes the nature of the interactions between teachers and students when compared with classroom teaching. And this was one of the predictions for Pedagogy 3.0. It said that technology is neither good nor bad in itself, but also it is not a neutral force. It promotes collaboration and sharing. It also promotes a kind of emotional intimacy between strangers, which can sometimes be helpful and other times it can be positively harmful. ICT redraws the boundaries between people. We have to accept the fact that we will not be able to recreate face-to-face classroom experiences in a virtual space, because technology changes the interactions. What we need to do is create a new kind of space that complements classroom teaching. One of the first things that we saw early on in remote teaching was the rush to try to recreate as closely as possible the classroom experience online. This is still the dominant model, especially in England, which has a significant focus on students learning content in order to be able to pass examinations, which are regarded as being very high status. So what we see is very much a teacher-centered, teacher-controlled pedagogy, with the emphasis on individual performance in tightly controlled contexts. Schools which have very strong behaviour for learning policies, such as the Michaela Community School in Wembley, London, have moved towards Zoom-orientated lessons by creating a new set of rules for online conduct for their teachers and for their students. I'm not saying that this is good or bad. What I'm really observing is this is a visible example of teacher-centered pedagogy in an IT space. An alternative scenario which emerged from Pedagogy 3.0 was a much more student-centered pedagogy, where students were encouraged to collaborate and to share for themselves, and the teacher was acting as a facilitator, a guide on the side rather than a sage on the stage, as it was put back then. The idea was to empower students, to give them some control over the scope and the content of their work, so that students could choose when to use ICT and how to take responsibility for their own learning. Peer mentoring, peer support and peer assessment were key indicators of this kind of pedagogy. Even so, schools which operated student-centered pedagogies tended to be using this more for their younger years, and the approach became more traditional and teacher-centered when the students came to their examination years. School accountability measures mean that schools are judged on their student examination performances, and this tended to limit the extent to which student-centered pedagogy was employed with examination classes. The most striking example of student-centered pedagogy I ever encountered was in a school in the Arab quarter of Amsterdam, where students were given individualised learning programs through their iPads, which they could follow from the age of 4 upwards. There were children in that school who were doing mathematics that were 5 years ahead of their chronological age. The school no longer exists, and closed partly because students found it very difficult to take the national examinations for entry to senior school. So, what will remain after COVID? Ideally, I hope that we are gaining a new confidence and awareness of when and where to use ICT to create novel learning experiences that are much more than simply simulations of classrooms. I hope these experiences will involve a combination of face-to-face, synchronous and asynchronous remote learning, often within the same teaching experience. I hope that teachers will develop a versatility in the way in which they give control to students and then take it back again, blending together teacher and student-centered pedagogies into something which is new and versatile. This is what we hoped Pedagogy 3 would be like. I hope teachers will take advantage of a new generation of tools, such as OneNote Class Notebook, which are really learning ecosystems designed for individual and collaborative work, giving teachers and students opportunities to work together in ways that suit them. Trying to create safe walled gardens where students can explore ideas safely with a sense of purpose and focus. I hope ICT will remain a force in education and not just for lockdown and snow days. There will be a reaction against ICT at the end of this lockdown, but I hope that enough teachers will gain enough experiences to see the benefits of this kind of approach. I am more confident than I was a few months ago.